What can I say about this fight other than the fact that it seems like it could be a loser goes home match, Mr. Perfect versus Ric Flair on Raw style. We have Ninja Guido Cannetti coming in at 42 years old at bantamweight. He's a man. He's 42, taking on Kris Moutinho, and I get it, the Mike Gundy reference kind of applies in this sense, because for Guido Cannetti, if you look at it, he's been in the UFC for what seems like forever, and it was long periods of inactivity during his career that kind of got him caught. But the craziest part about it for Cannetti, he comes in off of the Ultimate Fighter Latin America Season 1 with that Michael Gilmore-esque rub. I mean, he loses to Marco Beltran, loses to Alejandro Perez, who ends up winning that season. Then he fights Henry Briones at UFC 180, and what happens?
Got finished.
Well, gosh darn it, he loses that fight and he gets finished too. And I don't know what he had, what kind of dirt he had on the UFC, but they kept
Sam Alvey dirt.
They kept Guido Cannetti around. So Guido in the UFC is 2-5. It's salty as it gets, but almost like Marlon Moraes that you're going to see coming up in that co-main event slot. Guido, even in the fights that he loses, he has these little windows that you go, wow, Guido, he's an interesting fighter. And I mean, he is, because he's fighting out of Our Town MMA in Argentina, not one of the bigger gyms out there. He is on an impressive strength and conditioning regimen. Now, I said that about Michel Prazeres before his last fight. He was all over the socials, lifting the weights. But Guido, insert the picture here. I mean, yeah, the guy's shredded, and you love to see it, especially for 42. But you look at the fights that he's had, the two wins that he's got, Hugo Viana and Diego Rivas, neither one of those guys are in the UFC anymore. But in the losses, like Henry Briones, who I get it, not in the UFC, but Kyung Gong, Marlon Vera, Dana Bakary, and Mana Martinez, those guys are all still very much in the UFC. And even in some of those losses, just a second, the Dana Bakary fight where he starts off a little good, and then he goes out there and gets flatlined in the first round. And then the Mana Martinez fight where it's like, okay, first round, Guido looks great. He's pumping those leg kicks out there. You always have to worry about that great left hook that he has of his own. You got to worry about that right that he pops out there, mixes things up, really goes well to the body, to the legs. But I'm selling you like world championship.
Yeah, you're his hype man right now.
I'm selling you world championship Guido Cannetti. If you include those fights on The Ultimate Fighter back in 2014 when he was 30-friggin-5.
What would his record be, Craig?
It's salty. I mean, we're talking 2-7. 2-7 if we consider those since then, 8-8 total.
Exactly.
It's
and
not good.
That's my big point about Cannetti. Why is an 8-8 fighter in the UFC? And I understand we don't count Contender Series, or not Contender Series fights, but Ultimate Fighter fights, because they are exhibition matchups. But you get the idea. He's 8-6, midway through his career had 2 exhibition bouts, loses them both, and he's still in the UFC. And I'm not here to tell you Kris Moutinho is all of a sudden going to be some top 15 guy in the future. But let's just state what we know about both guys. Guido Cannetti has a really strong start. He's extremely physically strong, has nothing for a gas tank, though, at this stage of his career. And honestly, at any stage of his career, he didn't really have much of a gas tank. And you do see it in all of his fights. You're right. He gets off to that really good start, kind of burns all the gas in the tank, and then kind of coasts for the rest of the fight. And against some guys like Mana Martinez, who aren't at the top of the division, you can get to a decision, and it was split. I still thought Mana Martinez was able to get the win.
Adelaide Bird, the 10-9 kicker in the second round.
But in most cases, like go back to the Marlon Vera fight, he looks pretty good against Marlon Vera early, at least for the first couple of minutes. His physical strength really is a key. And then the second his cardio falls off a cliff, and guess what? I'm here to tell you, it happens in 99% of his fights. It's happened in all of them. He does really start to fade hard, and that's when he does get finished. And against Kris Moutinho, who isn't the best grappler in the world, isn't the most refined striker in the world, and isn't really a power puncher either, so he is going to have to rely on the longevity of this fight. The one thing he did prove in his last matchup against Sean O'Malley is he does have really good cardio, and he does have a pretty good level of output too, because that's the one thing that a lot of people did gloss over. Yes, Moutinho ate an ungodly amount of damage, like he ate hundreds of strikes in that matchup. He hit Sean O'Malley with a couple decent strikes, and I know we're just trying to nitpick a few positives here and there, because let's be honest, it was a very negative experience, I would imagine, for Moutinho, but he did have a few moments in that fight where he was able to close the distance on O'Malley, even late in that third round, so that does give you a little bit of confidence against someone like Guido Cannetti, who does tend to gas in his fights.
And a negative in terms of, yeah, you lost for Kris Moutinho, huge following on social media out of that fight with Sean O'Malley. It was on a pay-per-view main card, a Conor McGregor card. Maybe it was an O'Day Osborne card too, we don't know, but, well, we could tell, but when we look at it for Kris Moutinho, the craziest part about it for him, when I look at his overall body of work, it's you're losing to some better fighters. I mean, Tony Gravely is on the record.
Really good fighter.
He gets completely out-wrestled in that one. He gets finished. He loses to Johnny Campbell, a guy who's been there and done that on the regional scene for a very long time. Some nice wins in his last 2 fights. Andrew Salas took all of the damage before it ends up on the mat, and then you have Moutinho getting the submission. But again, out of Moutinho, doesn't have great striking defense, and this is just peel back the curtain outside of the Sean O'Malley fight. Doesn't have good striking defense against lower levels of competition outside of the UFC on the regional scene. Doesn't have good takedown defense, striking defense. Throws good for his volume and has all right takedowns of his own, and he's a decent grappler, and he's a guy that's trained out of Regiment Training Center. Head coach Jorge Rivera, you know, the guy that Michael Bisping spat at his corner that one time in that fight a long time ago. And he's lately started refining his skills at uppercuts boxing, so I threw that there in the picture for this fight. But really neat out of Kris Moutinho. This, I will say, is one of the harder fights to try and gauge because, again, for Guido Cannetti, the craziest part is if you consider those fights on The Ultimate Fighter, he's 8-8, but they don't count, so 8-6. Positive strike differential, good striking accuracy, good offensive grappling, good defensive grappling. Yet he's 2-5 in the UFC. Like, it's just funny how
Which would imply that he's not good at all those things you just said he was good at.
That's it. It is funny when you have a good sample size, and he's lost against decent fighters. But again, now we're taking on Kris Moutinho. And for Kris Moutinho, a great opportunity to just hit that reset button. And do you think, I mean, for Moutinho, he loses to Sean O'Malley, he goes on the Pat McAfee show. If Guido Cannetti beats Kris Moutinho, do you think Pat McAfee and AJ Hawk...
You've asked me a lot about Pat McAfee, and I've never watched his show. I probably not. No? I don't even... No, Guido Cannetti probably doesn't even get recognized in Argentina. That's not true, but I don't really think he's that big of a deal. I just think this is one of those classic boxing fights where the UFC realizes Moutinho did get a little bit of hype after his last fight against Sean O'Malley. So what do you do with a guy who's probably on what we can call a league minimum contract in the UFC? We could probably get him a decent, easy matchup his next time out against a 42-year-old who, like you said, is 8-6, but kind of also 8-8 in his MMA career. Like, this isn't a great matchup for a UFC level fight, if we're being honest. But I do think the cardio of Moutinho really does set him apart. I think defensively, he is a good enough grappler to where it's not like Cannetti's some monster on the mat where he's going to submit you just like that. So I do think Moutinho can hang with him at least for one round, weather whatever storm Cannetti brings. And then I do think Moutinho can start to pull apart late.
Guido Cannetti open to -125 favorite. He's a +116 or thereabouts right now in best fight odds. For Moutinho, open to +105. He's a -140. And yeah, this is a really tricky fight. We have a look at the Tapology votes. I'm not going to leave him up for a surprise. 550 total votes, 77% Moutinho, 76% by decision. For the 23% that have Cannetti, 77% by decision. And when I look at this fight, Kris Moutinho is not a power guy. He's a volume guy. And that's one of those games that if you can get Cannetti on the back foot, if he doesn't really hit you, if he's not able to land that lead leg kick, you could have a great time out there. But for Guido, the opposite. He's a guy that, yes, he loses to Mana Martinez his last time out there with Martinez. I expected him to knock out Cannetti in the first round, and he just came out a little flat. Obviously, the Saul Solis stuff was weighing heavy on his mind. You look at it for Cannetti, he was originally due to take on a big-time guy in Mario Bautista, and then he ends up with Martinez in that fight, so a little bit of a different look there. But a guy who's gotten finished early in his fights, I'm eager to see how he hangs in there. It seems like we have our minds made up, though, on this one.
I watch every UFC card, Craig, and I have no idea who Hugo Viana is, one of Guido Cannetti's 2 wins. So that tells you what his level of competition is with his wins in the UFC. I do think this is not a rebuild fight for Kris Moutinho, but I do think this is sort of to help him retrace his steps, get back on the winning track. Again, I don't expect him to get in the top 15 anytime soon, but I do think Moutinho could have kind of maybe a Kyle Bochniak-like career. Is that a good comp? Or he could have
MMA?
Yeah, he could just have fun fights with guys, stick around for a little bit, but I don't really see him as having the highest ceiling in the organization.
Give me the guy who's 13 years older to win the first round and a little bit of the second round, enough to sway the judges, and then give up the third round. I've got Guido Cannetti in this one. Again, I like Sean O'Malley. I do like Sean O'Malley. I like Kris Moutinho with the volume. I'm eager to see how he's able to withstand a lot of those lower body attacks out of Cannetti. I really do. The boxing of Moutinho, it continues to get better, and I expect us to see a little bit of that in this fight. You talked about it. He definitely had some good successes last time out against Sean O'Malley with the hands, surprisingly to some, at least to me anyway, because O'Malley was a giant favorite in that fight. But I will go with Argentina's Cannetti in this one for the reasons that I have stated. So split on the pick on this one. But again, you look at some of those fights on that XMMA 4 card that's coming up shortly, and this one stacks up with those ones.
Hugo could walk into this room right now and I'd have no idea who he is.
That guy? Huh?
He's one of Guido Cannetti's 2 wins in the UFC, and I've never heard of him. Like, I don't even know if he exists.
It is absolute wildness.
Tough. Yeah, I think Kris Moutinho, this is a setup fight for him. I do think his cardio really will pull him apart. Guido Cannetti hasn't won a second round in a hot minute, so if you are relying on him to do that in this matchup, it might be a tough one, but I do have Moutinho.
Big time fight coming up this weekend. You let us know down below in the comments section who you have in this matchup of very unranked bantamweights. We got a big time card coming up and some top ranked bantamweights in the co-main event between Marlon Moraes taking on Sung Yadong. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.